my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. Today's episode is in partnership with Needed. The prenatal vitamin industry is failing us, leaving 95% of us depleted during one of the most nutritionally demanding times in our life. There's overwhelming evidence that higher standards of nutrition will improve fertility, birth outcomes, and the trajectory of life. Despite this, most prenatal vitamins only provide bare minimum nutrition. Needed goes way beyond bare minimums with products that can fully meet the needs of our minds, bodies, and babies. Needed's radically better nutritional system is third-party tested and rigorously developed with the endorsement of over 10,000 women's health experts. In addition to their prenatal multivitamins and pre and probiotics, I am obsessed with their cognitive support supplement, which helps with brain fog, which I know is such a struggle when you're postpartum. A new exciting product from Needed is their Prenatal Choline Plus. Choline is super important for baby's brain development during pregnancy and breastfeeding. It also helps with your mood and metabolism, and it's a bulky ingredient, so it's hard to get enough that you need into your prenatal vitamins. So this separate one is going to get you to the 91% of your daily value versus most prenatals that only have about 1/10. So go over to Needed and check out how you can bundle that with your prenatal vitamins, and it's a really exciting new product that they're offering. At this point, I've talked to so many Birth Hour listeners who have discovered Needed through the podcast, and I love hearing the feedback that they're feeling better during pregnancy since starting with Needed's prenatal vitamins. Needed has all your needs covered from preconception to postpartum and beyond. Needed also simplifies things by bundling core products into easy and flexible monthly plans. You can use the code BIRTHHOUR for 20% off your first order and up to 40% off monthly plans at thisisneeded.com. Since this discount applies to your first order only, I always recommend going with one of the plans for the best value. At the end of this episode, I talked to Ryan, co-founder of Needed, about their recent IRB study results and what makes their products really stand out. So stay tuned for that conversation at the end of this episode. Before we get to today's birth story, I want to talk a little bit about our online childbirth course. It's called Know Your Options, and this is the course you've been looking for if you just have that gut feeling that you know you should be taking a childbirth course, but maybe the one that's being offered to you by your care provider is not exactly what you're looking for. It might be more catered towards the type of birth they want you to have versus making you informed of all your different options and how to address different things that happen in birth, because as this podcast has shown us, birth is very unpredictable. So we would love to have you check out our 12-module course. You can go to thebirthhour.com/course to see detailed outlines of what is included in the course. You will also get a bonus course called Beyond the First Latch that is an additional 6 modules all about pumping, feeding your baby, going back to paid work if that's part of your plan. And we have a special coupon code for you. It's 100OFF for $100 off enrollment. Again, that's thebirthhour.com/course. Another great way to be part of the Birth Hour community is by supporting us over on Patreon. So by pledging your support each month at the $5 a month level, you can get access to all of our archived episodes, so over 800 additional episodes not in the main podcast feed, as well as our private Facebook group that has such a great backlog of information. Just using that search bar, you can get almost any question answered, and you're going to find really supportive people there that are going to become your friends. And in addition to that, we do monthly Zoom calls. Just go over to patreon.com/birth hour and become a Patreon member and come see what it's all about. It's just $5 a month. You can get an even bigger discount. If you want to do an annual membership, you'll see that option there. And there's also an option to get it as a gift. So if you have a friend or a mother-in-law or somebody asking you what they can get you to help you prepare for baby, maybe you want a Birth Hour Patreon membership so that you can listen to more and more birth stories and find great community. So again, head over to patreon.com/birth hour to get started with that. Today's birth story guest is Haley, and she's going to share an unmedicated hospital birth with Midwives as her care providers. Let's hear from Haley. Hi, Haley. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Hey, Bryn. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, before we get to your story, can you tell listeners a little bit about you and your family?
Yeah. So I live in the greater Boston area with my spouse and my dog, and now my son. He is 10 weeks old. And I work as a mental health therapist in the Boston area. And my partner is a middle school teacher. And we're married for about 10 years before we decided to have a baby. And we are very happy to have welcomed our son. And he is going to complete our family. So we plan to have him as an only child. Yeah, that kind of describes me. I like to do a lot of yoga, and we go for long family walks. We're big hikers and campers, so we're looking forward to when our baby gets a little bit bigger so we can continue with our outdoor adventures.
All right. Well, we're going to hear his story today. So why don't you start with wherever you feel comfortable as far as getting pregnant, finding out you were pregnant?
Okay. Yeah. Like I said, we met in college and we were married for quite a while before we knew we wanted to have kids. So that was very much on purpose, and was really nice to have such a long time, just the two of us. And then we sort of both felt like enough time had gone by and we were ready to take a next step in our family. So we started trying after I had finished up with graduate school, which felt like a good time. We had debated starting to try while I was in grad school, but it was, everything was so busy. So we waited until I had graduated and had gotten a, full-time job. And it took us about, I would say, 8-ish months to conceive successfully. There were a few months where we went to Italy for a friend's wedding at one point, and we specifically didn't try that month because I was I don't want to be sick when I'm in Italy for 2 weeks. So there are a few months where we purposely didn't try, but I would say it was 8-ish months. I did go to the doctor after 6 months, my OB, because she said since I was over 35, they could run some tests sooner rather than later, just to catch it if anything was wrong, quote unquote. So I did that. Everything was fine. We tried for a couple more months and finally started using the ovulation strips. And after using that for one cycle, it took, and it totally worked. So that was really exciting. I remember knowing, I had a feeling that it had taken, and we were actually going home to visit my parents that weekend. And I specifically didn't take a test before going because I knew that if I knew, then somehow my mother would know. She would just incept it. So I didn't know officially, so she couldn't know. And then I took a test when we got home after that weekend, and I was indeed pregnant. So that was exciting. And we told family pretty early on, around I would say 5 weeks, very, very soon after taking the test, just our parents. And then one thing actually that is a funny part of our story is that I had this very strong fear that we would get pregnant with twins because we had agreed that we only wanted to have one child. So that was our family plan. So I had this fear basically that we would have twins just because that was the plan we had made. So we actually ended up getting an early ultrasound because I had some bleeding really early on, around 6 weeks. So it was totally I would say luck that my OB suggested we go get an ultrasound just to make sure there was no problem with the bleeding. But we were able to find out super early whether or not it was twins. So there was a single pregnancy, and we were able to know that around 6 weeks. So I didn't have to ruminate on that until the 10 or 12 week ultrasound. And it was around that time that I also decided to switch from my OB to a midwifery practice at a local Boston hospital. They have midwifery care and a hospital setting, which for me was kind of exactly what I wanted. I wanted to be in the care of more of a holistic midwifery approach, but also be close to Western medicine and close to the hospital in case I needed the surgery. So that worked out for us. And we switched pretty early on to their care. And I felt pretty good super early on, but then I had what I would describe as horrific nausea for a solid 6 weeks. I never vomited, but I just was nauseated 24/7. So that walloped me. But I luckily moved through that after pretty much the 12-week mark. My parents had come to visit for Thanksgiving, and I was worried I wouldn't be able to eat anything or enjoy myself. And it was right around then that I kind of the nausea cleared up. So that was really helpful timing. And then after that, I felt pretty good while I was pregnant. I think I have a little amnesia now in hindsight. Like, I think if I think about it, I remember like, yeah, there was heartburn and I was tired, but in hindsight, overall, I would say being pregnant was a pretty decent experience for me. I did a lot of yoga and a lot of walking, and I felt pretty good physically. I think towards the end, I definitely, was ready to move on. But we also had a few friends who were pregnant too at pretty much the exact same time. So it was fun to kind of go through that with my other girlfriends who were pregnant at the time. We could kind of like vent together and share what we were going through. So that was nice. At the end, because I work as a therapist, I started my leave about 10 days to 2 weeks before my due date, just so I could finish up with clients and end with them in not an abrupt way. Hopefully trying to minimize the possibility of me just kind of going into spontaneous labor and not being able to finish up sessions with clients out of the blue, basically. So I intentionally did that. So I wrapped up work a solid 10 days before my due date, which was actually really nice and was really restful. And I did, a lot of nesting, and I was able to just spend some time alone. I went to yoga, I got a pedicure, I organized all the clothes. So that was a nice time. And then it was also nice because I had the flexibility to do that because Massachusetts provides paid leave. So if you're the birthing parent, you get 26 weeks of leave. So
amazing.
Yeah, it's really amazing. So I felt lucky to be able to, tack on another week or so ahead of the due date to be able to do that. Yeah. So the due date came and went, which was June 1st, and not surprising. First pregnancy, my midwives had said, don't be surprised if you blow past your due date, which I indeed did. And I remember that being pretty hard for both myself and my spouse. We were like, okay, this baby's never coming. We were basically totally in denial that it would ever come out, which was so interesting. So the due date came and went, which was June 1st. And that was a little mentally hard for both myself and my spouse, just because we were, anxious for the birth to come, and we were planning a spontaneous delivery. So that was kind of weird to wrap our head around, that you just it could happen any minute or in 2 more weeks. So that was interesting. But we had been working with a really great doula collective. And so during that point in time, I was able to talk with them about it and just get more mental support for that period of time and being patient. I also forgot to mention that during the end of our pregnancy, we had purchased the Birth Hour Know Your Options course. And this was actually a huge part of the 3rd trimester. We had this coffee date on Sunday mornings where we would watch the course together. We knew we needed to carve out time, otherwise it would get buried. So that became a really nice ritual towards the end. And it was really helpful in making our birth plan, which we did with our doulas as well. So it was nice to be able to actually have the information and make our decisions. And then we were able to also take that information that we learned from the course and talk about it with our doulas and apply it to our specific situation. And that was something that was really great about the Know Your Options course, is it truly is you figure out your own options. So it wasn't as if we were being told this is best or this is what to do or expect. We were really taking in all the information that the course offers and then making the best decision for us and our situation and our family, and based on my medical history and situation. And we were also able to bounce all of that off of our doula team and make our birth plan, which luckily for us, our hospital was very interested in having. We actually gave them our birth plan before I even went into labor.
Oh, wow.
So it was on my file. Yeah. So that was also really great. And, I'm a big planner, so that was helpful for us to have that in place so we knew what to expect.
Yeah, that's awesome. I haven't heard of that before, with hospitals taking it before you even come. It makes more sense because I feel sometimes you arrive and things are chaotic and it just kind of gets shoved into the file,
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, actually, in one of my last prenatal visits, my midwife was asking me questions that a birth plan would probably have listed on it, right? Like, oh, what do you want to do about vitamin K or the eye ointment? Or do you want expectant or active management of placenta? Like those questions. And I knew the answers because I had typed it in my birth plan. And that's when she said, oh, actually, if you send me that file, we'll upload it to your file essentially so that like we can all see that before you even come. So it was pretty great.
Yeah.
Everyone was on the same page about our plan.
Oh, that's so great. And I'm so glad that the Know Your Options course was helpful for you guys. I remember you sharing on one of the Zoom calls about how you guys did those coffee dates. And I thought that was such a good idea. And also will always stick with me that you mentioned your husband was a teacher and that he commented on how well the course was put together just from an educator's perspective. And we were just like, oh, we love you for saying that because we hadn't heard that compliment before.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So anything else as far as leading up to the birth?
No, that pretty much covers it up until like very, very early labor.
Okay, let's get into it.
Okay, so the due date was June 1st. And then by June 3rd, around 9 o'clock at night, when I went to bed, I started having some mild cramping, which somehow felt different than the Braxton Hicks. You know, like I had been having a lot of Braxton Hicks and they were very specifically felt like just a tightening and not painful for me. I know some other people, like even friends have said it was kind of hard for them to distinguish, but for me, it just felt like a totally different, it was like Braxton Hicks was one thing and these cramps felt more like a period, like PMS. So that started happening overnight. They were very super mild. I was like, maybe it's just like a different kind of Braxton Hicks or like, because in my mind, for some reason, I kept thinking like, this baby's not coming ever, right? Like we're past our due date. I'll just be pregnant until the end, like rest of my life. I don't know. My headspace was super weird. So I actually went into the guest room just to kind of like have some space and see what happened. And then overnight, they went away. So they went away around 2 a.m. And I was like, that's weird. So then I'm even more confused. The next morning, my spouse, who's a teacher, was leaving for work and he leaves super early in the morning. And I didn't say anything to him. He like came in and said goodbye. I think he assumed I was just like, you know, super pregnant and wanted extra space to sleep. And then this is a really interesting and random part of our birth story, but it is part of it. We have an older dog who is prone to back injuries and he actually jumped off the bed that morning after my spouse left for work and hurt his back again. So like this has happened once before and essentially he like slips a disc and basically is not able to walk. So this happened that morning after I had been cramping overnight and I call the vet. In my mind, I'm thinking like, I think I might be going into labor, you know, like today, right? I call the vet and we have to take the dog in, but he can't walk. So I can't like walk him to the vet. It's a whole thing. So I have to call my husband to say, I think you need to come home because I might be in labor, but mostly because you have to drive our dog to the vet. So he comes home, he leaves school. I indeed start to have cramps again, like later that afternoon. But what is happening is that our dog is no longer mobile. So now I'm, you know, extremely pregnant, possibly in labor. And now my husband has to carry our dog to go in and out of our apartment, which have stairs every time he needs to go to the bathroom. Not to mention, we're super worried about him. So while the plan had been for him to go to like the doggy daycare when I was in labor and during birth, no longer can he do that. So this is why it's part of the story, because it added a very like real extra layer of stress on this whole situation.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was a lot and terrible, terrible timing. And to fast forward, he's totally fine now and he's healed. However, so we had to call my parents who live in northern New York at like a 6 to 7 hour drive away. And I had to say, can you please like leave your house now to come watch our dog? Because I think labor is imminent. So shout out to my parents for basically dropping everything because that was not the plan. The plan was to we would let people know once the baby was born and then people would come and visit. So they basically dropped everything. They were like, okay, first thing tomorrow morning, we're leaving. So then the evening of the 4th, the cramps come back. Our dog is hurt. They're like very irregular. The doulas are trying to help me stay calm and rest. And I'm like, I can't chill about it because I keep wishing it's like moving more quickly. But then around 11 p.m., the cramps are definitely more intense and more regular. And I had the bloody show when I went to the bathroom. Yeah, that's when I texted my parents saying like, yeah, this is definitely real now. So please come first thing in the morning. And then this is when things started to really pick up. I went to go to the bathroom around midnight and I lost my mucus plug, which was kind of cool. It came out very like fully intact. So that was interesting to see. And I'm kind of glad that happened because it was a very specific symptom where I could be like, okay, like this is really happening. And so overnight I had cramps like every 6 to 8 minutes ish. I was like kind of dozing in between them, just trying to stay calm. And, you know, the advice like in the birth hour course, for example, was to like ignore as long as possible. But I feel like this was happening overnight where I had like nothing to distract me. I guess I had always imagined like going for a walk or like going to lunch or, you know, cleaning or doing something to like ignore the cramps. And I was just sort of like laying there in bed, like being anxious about it. So that ended up not being how I envisioned it. So that goes on and on. My husband is sleeping, which is good. And then in the morning, things slowed down again. And I was like, what is going on? Like things picked up at night and then they slowed down. And that happened for like 2 days in a row. So the doulas, again, I'm texting them and they're like, yep, just keep resting. Like it'll all happen. Meanwhile, my husband's carrying our dog who can't walk in and out of the house. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we're trying to, you know, relax and be in labor. My parents are driving. And then I was getting kind of like irritated at how slow things were moving. So we were like, maybe we'll do the miles circuit, but I just like didn't want to. So we made up this other like version of our own little labor circuit, which is so funny in hindsight. But my spouse started timing the contractions and we would like watch a 30-minute episode of like Parks and Rec. And then I would go pee and then he'd make me a snack. And then I would then I'd bounce on my ball for 20 minutes and then like repeat. So it was just like this way we could make the time that was feeling really wishy-washy pass a little more, I guess, concretely or quickly. And it really worked for us because it suddenly like time was in chunks instead of just like, well, like who knows what's happening. And because he started timing the contractions, we were able to see like, oh, they actually are getting closer together and longer. So it just gave me like more evidence that things were indeed progressing instead of just like, you know, being so like free flowing that I couldn't really grasp what was happening. So then at some point I took a shower and we got organized. My parents were close and we got to a place where the contractions were like 5 minutes and then 4 minutes and then even 3 minutes apart and lasting a minute each, which I learned from the course is like kind of the time to go to the hospital. And even though we could have probably stayed home longer than that, we decided that once my parents arrived, we were just going to go. We live in a small apartment. We didn't want to have like the four of us in here and my sick dog like laboring. So we just decided we were going to go, get settled in our birth location and just, you know, make the transition sooner rather than later. So we get there, we go to the hospital. I did the whole like leaning over the back seat, very uncomfortable, drive to the hospital. In my mind, like the baby was coming out at this point because it was so painful, but it's kind of comical to think about that now looking back because we get there and they check me and I was at 4 centimeters and 90% effaced. And I was so discouraged because I was, you know, like totally convinced that I was like crowning basically. But they were really good. The nurse and the midwife were like, no, this is really good progress. You know, like your options are you could go for like a long walk for a couple hours or you could stay and labor here. And I was like, you know what? I just feel like I was further along and maybe the transition, you know, I don't know, changed things. So we decided to stay and just kind of like redo our little circuit, but in the hospital setting. And I'm so glad we did because this was around like 6 p.m. that day. And from like 6 to 8 is when the time started to get hazy for me. It's so interesting. I remember like laboring in the hospital room. I would have a contraction. I would lean over the bed, have a contraction, and my husband would rub my back. The hip squeezes were not feeling good. I didn't want any pressure, but like light stroking felt nice. And then I would stand up and he would kind of like hold me while I was standing, and we would sway for a little bit in between. And then I would have another contraction, bend over, same. In my memory, I did that like 5 times. Like I had 5 contractions that way. And then I was like, you know what? I think I'm ready for the tub. But then in hindsight, as I was like going through my notes, my husband told me that actually was like 2 hours long that we did that. So it's so interesting that I like barely have a memory of that portion of labor. So I find that fascinating. And all along I was pretty firm on not having any pain management. I definitely didn't want an epidural because of the thought of like being constricted on the bed was not something I was interested in. And I wasn't really interested in like the nitrous oxide. I didn't really want that either. So eventually I decided to get in the tub. I had like waited as long as possible, and our doula was also on her way, and things were really spicy at that point. And I got in the tub and it felt so good. And this was at like probably 9 to 11 p.m. I had gotten in the tub and our doula arrived, and it was just like, she saved us. Like she, shout out to, I linked the resource in the show notes, but like shout out to our doula, Daniela. She came into the bathroom where I was in the tub, and she just sat right down on a tile floor and sat there for the next like 6 hours and coached me through every single contraction. Like she is my hero. And, you know, my husband was doing his best, but neither of us knew, right? Like, is any of this normal? And she was just amazing. And she coached me through every contraction, every breath. And I think the thing that was the most helpful was her helping me relax fully in between every contraction and like letting it go before the next one would come. And I think had she not helped me do that so well, I would have definitely started, I think probably like panicking, right? Because like the thought of what had just like the contraction that just ended and like knowing another one was coming was really mentally difficult. But if I could like let them go in between each one, it was just much more sustainable. And so that really saved us. And I was in the tub for a while, I would say like 5 to 6 hours. And the midwife came several times to check me. And the policy at this hospital is that you can't push, even if you feel the urge, until you're fully dilated. So that was something that we ended up needing to navigate because I was feeling super, super pushy towards the end, like that feeling of like having to poop, super pushy every contraction. And they were really kind of adamant, like, don't actively push, right? So that was hard too, but our doula helped us through that. And then she even said at one point, I remember she was like, if we do this right, we can get the baby down so low so that you like barely have to push essentially. And I was like, awesome. I trust you. Like whatever you say, let's do this. So we stayed in the tub as long as possible. And then around like 2 a.m., I think I was like, I'm ready to get out. I don't know what my thought process was, but I was like, I'm done being in here. Someone suggested I go to the bathroom. So I sit on the toilet, backwards. I'm like straddling it sort of, like this hospital toilet. And as I'm sitting on it, we hear this huge gush. And again, in my head, I'm like, oh, I just had the baby in the toilet. Of course, like this is my mindset. And I was like, what was that? And our doula, cool as a cucumber, was like, that was just your waters breaking. Like this is a good sign. And then, I mean, this part I just remember so clearly. I was like, I'm gonna, like a contraction is brewing and this is gonna be really, really bad. And I think I was yelling at this point, and my doula was like, yep, it's gonna be intense. This one's gonna feel, you're gonna feel it. Just let it come, breathe through it. And it was wild. That was a wild contraction. I'll never forget that one. But I think it was good because I think like once the water had broken, everything sped up. And so then after that, I like waddled towards the bed, and it's hazy at this point. Honestly, I don't know how much time passed, but at some point, the midwife said we should check again. So I got on the bed sideways, and she checked me, and I was fully dilated, thankfully, because in the tub a few times she was like, yeah, you're at 7, you're at 9. And I was like, I'm ready to push. So finally around 3 a.m, I was 10 centimeters. She said we could push. I stayed on my side, which shocked me. I don't know what position I thought I would push in, but I don't know. Laying on my side on the bed was not what I would have like guessed, but that was what she had checked me in that position. And I think the thought of moving at all at that point was just like out of the question. So I pushed on my left side. My husband was holding one of my legs. A bunch of people in there actually, because I had consented to interns being present. So that was interesting. I didn't realize how many people were in there until after the baby was born, because I was like kind of out of it. But there were a lot of people in there watching, which is kind of cool. And I was totally fine with that. So then I pushed for 39 minutes. So like 40-ish minutes I pushed. And that was so intense. Like I don't even really remember it being necessarily like painful, even though it was. What was more memorable is just that like the fetal ejection reflex, because I didn't have the epidural, was so strong. Like even if I hadn't actively pushed or no one was telling me what to do, the baby was going to come out no matter what, which was crazy. It was honestly like I was vomiting out of my vagina. It was wild. And then when he was crowning, the midwife was trying to help me not push super quickly. Like we had to go slower so that I didn't tear too much. And that was like honestly almost impossible to stop it. But I must have, because I ultimately only had a 2nd degree tear. So I think I did try to like not push for like a split second at a time. And then at 3:47 a.m., our baby was born, and my husband was like sobbing. Oh, that's also how I knew things were like close. I could hear him behind me crying. And so I knew in my like hazy dreamland that he could probably see the head, like he could see things happening. So I knew we were close. And then he was born, which was wild. And another shout out to our doula. She actually got some really good photos and a video or two of him actually coming out, which was awesome. And then he came out and they put him on my chest, and then he pooped everywhere, like right away, which was hilarious. There was like meconium everywhere, all over him, all over me, all over the bed. It was just, there's poop everywhere.
Oh my gosh.
Which was so funny, but also handy because he didn't really have a lot of poop later that day or the next day. And we never had to like really clean any of that. And all the professionals cleaned it up off of him and off of me, all that sticky stuff. So that was great. And then our doula helped him latch right away. So she was right there, and everyone, had their own like job after he came out to clean him. And my midwife was, stitching me up. My placenta came out at one point. That was pretty cool. And I got to look at it. And then he was not taken from me for a solid hour. That's like their hospital policy, which is great, unless the baby needs medical attention. So yeah, he was on my chest for at least an hour, and we got him latched, which was good. And then they took him to get weighed, and he was 8 pounds, 12 ounces, which funny enough is the exact weight that my husband was when he was born, which we thought was interesting. And then one thing that I remember is like, it felt like I was in such a dream state for the whole labor and birth. And then like as soon as he was out, it was like I came back into myself. It was so wild. And I feel like I opened my eyes, like literally and figuratively, for the first time in like 8 hours. It was really weird. Like I hadn't even like looked at my doula's face since she had arrived. And that's when I kind of like looked around. I remember like seeing everyone in the room. I had like just been on another planet for a while. And then I was just like laughing and hanging out and chatting with the nurses, and like the whole tone kind of just changed as soon as he was born. It was really interesting. And it was like all the pain was just like gone. And that's something I've been trying to like reckon with and like figure out, is like, how could you go from being in such a state of like pain for so long to just immediately almost the state of like euphoria was kind of wild. So that is my story of how he was born.
Yeah. Okay. So then let's talk about kind of just immediate postpartum and your stay and then going home and longer term.
Okay. So actually we got to stay at the hospital for 2 nights. They allowed 2 nights for a vaginal birth and 3 nights for a cesarean birth. And it was interesting before we even went into labor, I was like, maybe we'll just stay for 1 night and like come home. I want to be home. I want to be home. And then after we were there for 24 hours, I was like, I never want to leave. It was like, honestly, it was like staying in a hotel. We could order food and had our own private recovery room with big windows, and all of the nurses were so great and helpful. I think the only thing that was a little frustrating, and it was nobody's fault, was just how often we were checked on, because they check on the baby and then they check on me, and most of the time that doesn't coincide. So we were trying to get some sleep, but we would often get interrupted. So that was the only, I'd say, frustrating thing, but again, necessary. And I was glad that people were checking on my vitals as well. So we stayed there for 2 nights. Both sets of grandparents came to visit while we were in the hospital, and my cousin came too, which was really nice. And it was just like a lovely time to kind of cocoon together, and also to just like be in total denial that our dog was unwell. It was only after the fact that my husband told me that he was kind of worried that whole time we were going to have to like come home and put our dog down because he wouldn't have gotten better. I was not thinking about him at all during this time because I was like obviously focused on our baby. So it was nice to just kind of like not have to think about anything else except recovering. We had a couple lactation specialists come and support latching and breastfeeding, which was really important to me to establish. And that went quite well at the beginning. I will say, just for anyone else who's listening, I did have one consultant, I believe, prematurely suggested I use a nipple shield, which I think is a great tool if you really need it to support continued nursing. But I think, my baby was latching just fine. I think we just needed another couple, hours or days to really get it solidified. But we ended up using the shield, which again was fine because he was latching. But I just, for the first couple of weeks of breastfeeding, was just annoyed by it because it was just another like thing that I had to keep track of and clean. And if we were going for a walk or something, I'd be like, oh, where's the nipple shield? Like, do we have one? And it just, for me, wasn't, I don't think, necessary. And then my baby got used to it. So then it was like a whole thing to wean him off of it. So for anyone who might be offered a nipple shield, just, I didn't ask any questions, right? Like, what's this for? What are the pros and cons? How long will I need to use it? I just was like, okay, yeah, of course. Like, if this helps my baby eat, let's do it. And I think in hindsight, that was the one intervention that I was not prepared to ask questions about. And I wish I had. So just kind of noting that for anyone else who is on a breastfeeding journey. And then a week after we were home, our doula also came to do a postpartum checkup, which was fabulous. And that was super helpful because we, of all the things in our, the Know Your Options course, we didn't watch the newborn care section. So again, if people are listening to this, we were like, you know what, we'll watch that once he's born, no problem. We'll have time. And that was a real rookie mistake because we didn't have any idea what we were doing when we got home. So if you are taking the course, or if you are debating taking any type of newborn care course, if I were to give myself advice, I would have done that before our baby was born, when we had plenty of time to do that. So that that was probably a mistake on our part, but our doula came and kind of walked us through some of the basics and helped to support continued breastfeeding, which was great. And I would say for me, the hardest part of postpartum was just knowing that I really needed to prioritize physical rest. I think as someone who really was used to moving a lot and getting out of the house a lot for just my own enjoyment and like specifically for like mental health purposes, I think that was really hard and something I wasn't totally prepared for. So I think now that like I've gotten past 6 weeks and I'm starting to like move again and walk and feel a little more like myself, I'm definitely feeling better. But I think it was really hard to kind of accept the fact that I needed to honor that 6 weeks of rest. And I did, but that was hard for me, I would say. Yeah. Other than that, I would say healing went pretty well. And also still lucky to live in Massachusetts, where my husband also, as a non-birthing partner, gets 12 weeks of paid leave. So we are really grateful for that. And to have us both around was really nice. But again, for the first, honestly, like 6 weeks, he had to carry our dog outside. So it was really tough. Like I couldn't carry the dog. I couldn't walk the dog. So he was doing a lot of extra caring for our dog than we had originally sort of planned. So that was also a wrinkle in our postpartum. But once our dog got feeling better, once I was able to move more and cleared for movement, we kind of got into a different routine, and now things are running pretty smoothly.
That's good. Yeah, that's a lot. I mean, even just like a healthy dog, you notice them a lot more once a baby arrives. So I can only imagine. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thanks for sharing your story. Do you want to share resources?
Yes, I put together a list just to make sure I didn't forget any that I was hoping to share. So a couple books I read during early pregnancy and throughout was Emily Oster's book, Expecting Better. I had read it a couple years ago just out of curiosity, and I reread it when I was pregnant, and I found it really helpful to make informed decisions for myself about what I was and wasn't willing to like eat or drink or take medicine-wise while I was pregnant. And I also read Ina May's Guide to Childbirth, which was very interesting and like almost like a printed version of the birth hour, which was cool. And some really fun birth stories in that book. And I didn't read this, but my husband read and highly recommends The Birth Partner. He read that, found it really helpful. And he liked that book had like some specific like lists and charts and diagrams in there for partners who are supporting someone who's giving birth. He liked that. Obviously, the Birth Hour podcast, I've been listening for many, many years. So I continued to listen. I also listened a little more during pregnancy to evidence-based birth. And I took the Birth Hour's Know Your Options course, which I think that along with working with our doulas, it was the most helpful in terms of preparing for birth, preparing for labor. And I would say being able to like watch that with my spouse was super helpful, because I think he really, by the end, he had been hearing me like rant about pregnancy and birth, and like, you know, the cascade of interventions for years, because I've been listening to the Birth Hour, and he was all in on it. But I think after watching the Know Your Options course, he was even more informed, and we were very much in sync and on the same page about the decisions we wanted to make as a couple and as a family for like my own care and our baby. So that was really nice to be able to have the same information. Yeah, those are my resources.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed the course. And I love that you were a Birth Hour listener before even being sure you wanted to have kids. That always intrigues me when I hear that.
Yeah, I don't even remember how I stumbled upon it. And I know it was like at least 8 years ago, because it's when we first moved to Boston, and I would listen to it on my commute. I think I just, you know, I was always like a little therapist in the making. And so I think just like listening to people share their personal story or journey was really intriguing to me. And I think it's just like, it's great content and super interesting, and came in really handy when the time came for myself.
Awesome. All right. And then what's the best way for people to connect with you?
I am not on social media. So I think if people really want to reach out, especially for like Boston area resources who I've worked with, like our doula team and the midwives. They can email me. So it's my name, Haley Feikert, HALEY period FEICKERT @gmail.com. Also, if people Google my name, I'll come up on like Psychology Today or something. So you could probably find me that way, or like on LinkedIn if you Google me. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Haley.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to talk to Ryan, co-founder of Needed, about their recent IRB study results and all of the great products from Needed. Hi, Ryan. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast to chat with me about Needed again.
Brand, I'm so excited to be back.
Awesome. Well, before we get into all of the new things happening over at Needed, can you just share with my listeners a little bit about who you are and your role at Needed?
Absolutely. I'm the co-CEO and co-founder of Needed.
All right. So I recommend Needed to my listeners, my followers on Instagram all the time. I've been using the products for over a year now. And I just really love that with your perinatal products, you really go beyond the bare minimum. And it's just really important, especially for the people in my audience, because we know that during the stages of life where you're growing babies and feeding babies are especially nutritionally demanding. So I love that you guys are addressing these nutrient deficiencies and talking about now that not all prenatal vitamins are created equally. And on that note, your team just released the results of an IRB study highlighting these differences between standard prenatal vitamins versus needed. Can you just talk a little bit more about this?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so excited. This has been a baby of mine for a while.
Yeah.
But basically, there is overwhelming evidence that proper nutrient levels can improve fertility, birth outcomes, and the trajectory of life for both mother and baby thereafter. Yet, as we all know, despite our little kind of communities, nutrition has not been front and center in the perinatal standard of care. And most prenatals on the market provide bare minimum nutrition support. We're designing and conducting studies to add to the clinical literature to unequivocally prove that women deserve more support, resources, and radically better nutritional care. We really just fundamentally think the evidence just cannot be ignored anymore, as the lack of nutritional support is really failing women and children. So our goal for this study specifically was to take a more comprehensive look at nutritional status in pregnancy. The study compared nutritional characteristics between women taking the needed prenatal multi and a standard prenatal vitamin.
Okay.
We collected survey data and analyzed nutrient biomarkers, so nutrient levels actually in the blood themselves, in a diverse group of 235 adult pregnant women across 7 U.S. states. And what's really exciting, and what you're hinting towards, is that the results actually revealed quite striking insights into how maternal nutrition status differs by the type of prenatal vitamin a woman is taking during pregnancy. Specifically, we found that women taking the needed prenatal multi had higher blood levels of key nutrients for pregnancy, including vitamin D, B6, selenium, and zinc, among a number of others. When we compared prenatal subgroups, we found that only the group of women taking the needed multi had sufficient blood levels of vitamin D and vitamin B6 compared to the group taking the standard prenatal. And nutrients like vitamin D and B6 play key roles in pregnancy in supporting both maternal and baby health outcomes. So it's really exciting. And it's also important to reiterate that our study was diverse and the prenatal groups were comparable on several key factors outside of their prenatal vitamins. This is really important for the rigor of the study. So for example, 1/3 of the women in each group identified as a race ethnicity other than white, and women in both groups were in similar stages of their pregnancy.
Okay, and what does the IRB part mean?
The IRB is the Institutional Review Board, and they're basically a committee that reviews clinical research involving human subjects to ensure that certain ethical standards are met.
Okay. It's super important when studying pregnant women.
Super important when studying pregnant women, and in terms of showing proper kind of rigor and study design went into the methodology of how we conducted the research as well.
Right. So one thing that I thought was interesting is that a lot of this past studies weren't even done on pregnant women or even women. Oftentimes it was like based on white men as far as vitamin levels and things like that. So as you mentioned, these are really striking results. And what does this really mean for women in the trying to conceive or pregnancy or postpartum season of life? Like, what should we be taking away from this data?
You're right that sort of there is a lot of missing gaps in the research, though we also have found that there is a lot of really good research emphasizing the need for better nutrition at this stage of life. But overall, we see this study as adding to the growing body of evidence showing that, one, meeting nutritional needs through diet alone is very challenging in modern context. So supplementation is needed. Two, that most pregnant women in the U.S. fail to meet dietary recommendations for certain key nutrients that are very important for pregnancy, like vitamin D. And third, I think increased evidence that standard prenatals are really falling short in closing the gap between nutritional needs and dietary intake. And overall, we hope this study leads to more clinicians and moms advocating for the nutrition that is needed for a healthy pregnancy.
Yeah, and I've been sharing about this with my followers on Instagram from some of the data you guys are talking about. And one thing I thought was really interesting was the statistic about how few care providers are discussing nutrition with pregnant and postpartum women at all.
Yeah, that is absolutely striking. We found that nearly 80% of women reported receiving little to no nutritional advice from their OBGYN during their pregnancy care.
Yeah, and this is something that comes up on the podcast a lot because I feel like people really notice a difference when they have midwifery care versus OBGYNs, because nutrition is something that's talked about in these much longer prenatal appointments and things like that. So yeah, it's a big part of feeling good throughout pregnancy. And I know that one thing that Needed really focuses on as well is that it's not just during pregnancy, but also postpartum. So can you talk a little bit about that as well?
We equate it in a lot of ways to nutritional depletion, and that a lot of the importance for this life stage is in avoiding depletion. So meaning when your body lacks the essential vitamins, minerals, or other nutrients that are really needed for optimal function. And depletion is not something that occurs only through pregnancy, but women are more vulnerable in critical life stages such as pregnancy and breastfeeding. So that postpartum stage that you mentioned right there. And a lot of the problem is that women go into pregnancy already depleted and then increase their depletion in growing baby, so end up in a pretty tough spot postpartum. Mm-hmm. There are many contributors to this depletion, from nutrient deficient soil and stress. And then the signs of depletion like brittle nails, fatigue, headaches, mood changes, thinning hair, constipation, dry skin, all sound pretty familiar to us, right? Mm-hmm. And really research suggests that up to 95% of women experience nutritional depletion, even when they are on a prenatal vitamin.
Oh my gosh.
Depletion is, I think, a much bigger problem than we actually, have historically given it credit. And a lot of us, women just assume we have to feel these things, these signs of depletion, just as part of our, that's just the status quo. That's how it's supposed to be. And I think a lot of our sort of emphasis is showing that no, radically better is possible. There are ways to better support ourselves through nutrition to minimize those signs of depletion.
Yeah, I was actually just talking to someone recording their birth story, and they were saying how, they were super focused on their nutrition during pregnancy, and then it kind of fell to the wayside postpartum. And it's like especially if you're breastfeeding, it's taking a lot of energy and nutrients, and then you're also sleep deprived because you have a new baby. So the depletion, I think, like you mentioned, is just something we really need to focus on beyond pregnancy.
Yeah, and most care providers aren't really reminding folks. They think of it as like a prenatal, not a perinatal.
Right.
There are some postnatals that exist, but I think the use of them in that breastfeeding life stage that is actually more nutritionally intensive than pregnancy is a non-supported part of this life stage. And, where we see so many women really talking about that postpartum period being the most difficult. And I think being able to advocate and raise awareness to better support and how do we care for mom, not just care for baby during that stage is very important.
Yes, I'm just nodding along to everything over here. So are there any other supplements that women should consider outside of a prenatal to help fight depletion?
Absolutely. So most prenatals and aren't included are vitamin and mineral blends. And there are many other nutrients that are supportive of combating nutrition. Unfortunately, we just don't think that there's a single product that can fully get you over the hill on depletion lack. So it needed what we are really focused on rather than just a single product, though we do hero our prenatal multi a lot, but really an emphasis on a system of products is most supportive. And for example, we do offer an omega-3 DHA EPA add-on. So DHA omega is often something that you probably do hear as part of taking that alongside your prenatal. And DHA and EPA are very supportive of a healthy pregnancy. Sometimes they are combined with a prenatal multi, but we often see that can lead to kind of lack of nutrient integrity or too low of doses. So we do think it is important to offer it as a separate product for that reason, but do advocate for that being added on to your system of products. And then there's a whole host of other products depending on needs. I personally really love our sleep support. As lack of sleep is a big contributor to depletion. And I also really love our breastfeeding safe cognitive support product. It's a product that really helps me sort of feel like me and try to do it all by being a working mom while still, breastfeeding and chasing after my kids. Being able to focus when I need to focus is a critical part of that.
Yes, I'm a huge fan of that one as well. So you guys offer several bundles and things like that with these add-ons. Where's the best place for people to start if they're trying to decide what's right for them?
Our website does help to guide you by sort of life stage or need, which is thisisneeded.com, or we're at Needed on Instagram. And we actually have a team of trained nutritionists and doulas as part of our customer support team. So they're eager and ready to help if you do want to sort of DM us or email us if you kind of get stuck on the website your own. So that's a great place to start. And then I'd also really recommend folks to go to thisisneeded.com/thrive to learn more about the prenatal study and the rigor that went into it and a lot more results beyond what we're able to share today.
Yes, it's so fascinating. And I'm the same way. I can't squeeze it all in to share on Instagram either. And so I'm please go check it out because it really is amazing what you guys were able to find out from this study. And I love that people are available in the DMs to help guide because I feel like it can be really overwhelming when choosing your prenatal. And starting with the main prenatal is obviously a great choice, but I know lots of people want to take advantage of these bundles too. So that's great to know that it's available to DM or email.
Yeah, I think we're here to help. And it's really a passion of a lot of members of the team to do so. So we're excited to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for chatting with me about all of this. It's always great to hear what you guys are up to. And I'm always happy to share with my listeners about Needed.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much again to Haley for sharing her birth story and, of course, to Needed for sponsoring this episode. Remember to use the coupon code BIRTHHOUR at thisisneeded.com and you'll save up to 40% on your first order when you're doing those bundles and getting everything you need throughout pregnancy and postpartum. If you want to find Haley's show notes page, you can head to thebirthhour.com and just search for her name in the search bar.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.